brief span of a month, the conditions that we're here to address have become even more urgent. As before, the regime in Tehran is the center of the terrorism threat against us and the threat to destroy Western civilization as we know it, and to do so, if possible, by obtaining nuclear weapons. It oppresses its own people. It threatens its neighbors. It has made clear that if it gets nuclear weapons, it will not hesitate to use them. There are about 3,500 members of MEK who now live at a place on the border of Iran, in Iraq, that is known as Camp Ashraf, and although it's referred to as a camp, city would be a better description. These people fled Iran and set themselves up near the border so that they can live and support efforts to free their country. In 2003, when the United States invaded Iraq, the residents of Camp Ashraf surrendered their weapons, the weapons they had to defend themselves, and accepted written confirmation from the then deputy commander of Allied forces in Iraq, General Jeffrey Miller, on behalf of the United States, that they were protected persons under the Fourth Geneva Convention. From 2003 until 2009, the United States protected the residents of Ashraf and fulfilled the solemn obligation that we had undertaken in 2003. But in January 2009, as some of you may know, the United States turned over responsibility for safety and security to Iraqi security forces. Before that transfer took place, General David Petraeus said that the United States had been assured by the government of Iraq that the residents of Ashraf would be protected, and that he was proceeding with the transfer on the assumption that that pledge would be adhered to. Obviously, the residents of Ashraf have been a great source of anxiety to Iran, which would like nothing better than to see them repatriated to Iran, or at least crippled, so that they cannot pose a threat to the regime. Iran has brought increasing pressure on the Iraqi government within the past month. The situation of the residents of Camp Ashraf has gone from perilous to desperate. On January 7, 2 days after a visit to Baghdad by the Iranian foreign minister, the residents of Camp Ashraf were attacked by people acting at the direction of the Iranian Quds Force stationed in the Iranian embassy in Baghdad in cooperation with officials of the Iraqi government, and many were injured seriously. The Iraqi security forces, who were supposed to be there to protect the residents of Camp Ashraf, either turned a blind eye or actually assisted the attackers, even though the government of Iraq promised the United States that it would protect the residents of Ashraf. Those Iranian forces, supported by Iraqi forces, have placed at the gates of Ashraf some 180 loudspeakers that are used to threaten and harass the residents day and night, 24 hours a day, and to prevent them from sleeping. This psychological pressure has been ongoing for almost a year. Medical care continues to be denied the residents of Ashraf, and at least one patient in the last month has died due to lack of medical care. Now, this is history repeating itself. We've seen this before. In June of 2009, Nouri al-Maliki, head of the Iraqi government, visited Tehran, supposedly for personal reasons, and the next month, in July of 2009, Iraqi security forces attacked residents of Ashraf. To add insult to the United States, to injury that was suffered by the citizens of Ashraf, that attack took place during a visit to Iraq by Defense Secretary Robert Gates. In spite of the obvious slap in the face to the U.S. government, and in spite of the solemn assurances given by the American military when the residents of Ashraf surrendered their weapons in 2003, our Secretary of State, when she was questioned about it then, said that the attack was an internal matter for the government of Iraq and not a concern of the United States. Well, we're on the eve of negotiations with the Iranian regime by our government and others. The history of the relationship between the United States and the Iranian regime since the 1979 revolution can really be summed up as a series of attempts by the United States to, as the diplomats say, engage the Iranian regime, each attempt slightly less successful than the one that preceded it. I don't have to review that entire history, but an important part of it begins in the 1990s, during the Clinton administration, when the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, also known as MEK, was designated by the Secretary of State under U.S. law as a foreign terrorist organization. That designation continues to this day. It continues to be, as it was then, unjustified. MEK is an organization of Iranians, both inside Iran and outside Iran, that opposes the current regime, favors government in Iran that is organized along democratic, secular, non-nuclear lines, a democratic, secular, non-nuclear republic. And I should add, this is not one of the few organizations of Iranians that fits that description. It is, in point of fact, the only one. It is certainly helpful for MEK to remain a bone in the throat of Iran and a diversion to the regime because of its potential to undermine the regime. But the MEK has been a lot more than just a bone in the throat. It has provided valuable information and intelligence on the Iranian nuclear program to the United States. It is fair to say that the United States would not have known a great deal of what it does know now about the Iranian nuclear program without information obtained by MEK, including, but certainly not limited, to the nuclear facilities at Natanz and Arak, the disclosure of which led to the beginning of pressure on Iran that arises from what is obviously a nuclear weapons program. It's pretty openly acknowledged that the reason MEK was placed on the list during the Clinton administration was to curry favor with Iran and to use the designation as a way of entering into dialogue with the Iranian regime. I'm sorry to say that even during the administration that I served in, we kept it on the list of designated organizations, which, by the way, includes the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, out of fear that if MEK were removed from the list, the Iranians would provide insurgents with weapons in Iraq, including IEDs. Well, of course, they're doing that anyway. These are very misguided reasons for continuing to brand as terrorists a group of people who, so far as anyone can tell, are interested only in bringing to their country the same benefits of freedom that we have. And also, it doesn't work. The Iranian regime is now in the enviable position of having the United States designate as a terrorist organization a group of Iranians who are a threat to that regime, and of limiting that group's activities. In other words, the Iranians have the great Satan working for them. And of course, the continued designation of the MEK as a foreign terrorist organization gives great comfort to the Iranian regime by putting on the sidelines an organization that is potentially a grave threat to the regime, and it also provides an added justification for the regime to execute MEK members in Iran and to boast that in doing so it is executing terrorists. A 63-year-old man named Ali Saremi, whose only crime was to visit his son at Ashraf, was executed at the end of 2010 as one guilty of enmity against God or terrorism. What's to be done? As you're aware, there's a growing consensus here in this country and outside it of the need to delist MEK. An ever-increasing number of members of Congress are supporting a resolution favoring that result, and there is great consensus outside the Congress as well. I think the case has been made that when Iranians go into the street and put their lives on the line for freedom, as they are doing now and as they did after the fraudulent election in 2009, our response, through those in our government who speak for us, must be more than to remind the mullahs, as we did, that the world is watching. The world is watching? The world has watched frequently while horrors were committed and done nothing. The world was watching when the Germans committed genocide and murdered 6 million of my co-religionists during World War II. The world was watching when revolutions were suppressed by the Soviets in Eastern Europe. The world was watching genocide in Rwanda and Darfur. The world is watching isn't enough. We owe the Iranian people and the freedom that we stand for much more. What is necessary is to make clear in word and deed that we can offer more than condolences when things go wrong to people who are willing to put their lives on the line for freedom. We must offer support and encouragement, and we must make it clear in word and deed to the Iranian regime that we stand with those who stand for freedom and demand regime change. An effective way to do that would be to enter the upcoming negotiation with Iran having taken MEK off the list of foreign terrorist organizations, which would show that we recognize MEK as a group that is devoted to restoring freedom to Iran, and that we will not use MEK and not let anybody else use MEK as a bargaining chip. I thank you very much for the privilege of speaking with you.